There once was a real happy farmer who donned a great suit of armor. She went to get stone, but was killed by some bones. Rest in peace, Genevieve, I will mourn her. Hey guys, James here again with another game review, and this time we're talking about Stacklands, a deck building city builder where you build up a village, harvest resources, craft new cards, and complete a series of different quests. If I had to compare this game to other games, I'd say it's an interesting mix of games. It's a city builder that reminds me in some ways of RimWorld, but it also uses card mechanics like Cultist Simulator. Then there's some micromanagement aspects that remind me of Faster Than Light. Stacklands is a cute little game you can sink a good number of hours into, but is it really worth the $5 price tag? Let's find out now. So as you can probably tell from the gameplay, Stacklands is a deck building game at its core. You start off the game with a booster pack which grants you your first villager and access to some basic resources. You're going to want to start using your villager to harvest resources and food by stacking them on the relevant cards. They'll then passively begin to harvest whatever you assign them to. Then, with the resources you harvest, you can either craft different cards to help expand your village, or you can sell off extras in order to buy booster packs, which can grant you access to interesting new cards and expand what you're capable of doing. An important thing to note is that the game runs on a consistent timer. At the end of every day, or moon as it's referred to in the game, you'll need to do two things. First, you need to make sure you have enough food to feed your villagers. Anyone who doesn't get the required amount of food will then starve and die, and if you lose all your villagers, you then lose the game. Then, you're going to be forced to sell off extra cards. Basically, you're going to have a card limit that you can end a moon with. If you're over this limit, you'll have to sell your cards until you hit that limit. You can craft different structures that can increase the card limit, but I think early on you'll have to do quite a bit of selling until you become more established. While this whole process can be a little bit annoying to have to deal with, I do think it was a smart way to curb the potential growth and give more of a challenge to players. And honestly, that's essentially the entire game loop. Every day you just harvest resources and food, build up your village, and then at the end of the moon, you feed your villagers and sell off extra cards. Your goal is then to create a somewhat self-sustaining village, complete different quests, and try to defeat different enemies. There's actually quite a variety of different card types in the game. First, there's structures, which are different buildings you can create to develop your village. There's a decent variety, including buildings that will grant you more resources, buildings that expand your card limits, and with a house, you can even reproduce and create more villagers. Then, you have humans. These include villagers, and with different items you might find or craft, you can actually upgrade your villagers into more specialized classes, such as spearmen to defend your village. These classes will have different stats, including health, food requirements, and speed at which they perform different tasks. There's also some unique villagers you might discover or run into throughout the game, but I'm not going to spoil that here. Additionally, there are also different animals which you can domesticate and harvest different resources from, such as milk from cows and poop from rabbits. Next, you have ideas, which are essentially crafting recipes. You can get these in different booster packs, and these are very important for your progression throughout the game. I also just want to say here that I really like the crafting system overall, as it's very simple and has logical recipes that can be pretty easy to remember. There are quite a few recipes though. To craft, all you need to do is stack the relevant items, and maybe even a villager, and boom, after a bit of time, you have what you want. When it comes to the food, while you might start off the game with more basic foods, you'll actually discover different recipes throughout the game which will be able to satiate the hunger of more villagers. Then, you have locations which you can discover through booster packs. You can assign villagers to these locations and they'll go on an adventure. While out and about, they can bring back different resources, and occasionally will bring back enemies as well. This of course brings me to mobs. Throughout the game you'll face a number of different enemies. You can assign any number of villagers to a fight, and the cards will soon begin to hack away at each other in a sort of auto-battler style fight. There's definitely some pretty difficult mobs, but at least for me, it never felt too crazy, and it was always interesting to see what gets thrown your way. Overall though, I'd say that the gameplay, while very simplistic, is actually quite addictive. I found myself losing track of time just watching as my village expanded. While a lot of the game is actually pretty passive in nature, since you have to assign villagers to tasks, I find that you actually do need to do a decent amount of micromanaging. The micromanagement reminded me of the game Faster Than Light because I was constantly needing to reorganize my stacks. You can actually pause the game while you reorganize as well so you don't waste your moon. Every time you harvest a resource or complete crafting something, the cards will then pop with a nice satisfying sound effect, and while they'll often automatically stack similar cards together, space can actually be pretty tight, forcing you to constantly have to adjust things around and make sure that your villagers are working. It can be a bit tedious at times though, as you'll often just be reorganizing the same stuff over and over again. I also really enjoyed the fun little interactions you can discover between cards, and I thought that dynamic helped to promote exploring and stacking different cards together. I do have to say though, I think the game wasn't exactly difficult. You might die once or twice when starting out and figuring out the mechanics, but once you get the hang of the game and your village gets to a certain size, I actually think it's really hard to lose. What's nice though is that while the mainland game is easier and something you can definitely complete within maybe like 5 hours, A recent patch actually added a new island area which you can explore and ferry resources back and forth between. It comes with a bunch of new cards and things you can only discover on the island, as well as some more quests that expand upon the mainland game. I won't spoil the island part too much, but it definitely increases the challenge of the game, as food will now expire, and you'll also face some more interesting enemies. But again, once you reach a certain point, I do think it gets pretty hard to lose. So then, is Stacklands worth the price? I think Stacklands is a cute little game you can sink a good number of hours into. It took me about 5 hours to beat the main game, and then another 10 or so to beat the island, but after beating the game, I do have to say that I think the game isn't necessarily super replayable. You can start new runs, but once you know the recipes and secrets, I think it definitely loses a lot of its charm. The game is also a bit more passive in nature, so some people might not like that, but even so, it's addictive and you'll still find yourself busy with managing your stacks. Personally, I think it's easily worth the $5 price tag, but don't go into the game expecting it to be anything more than it actually is. I'm giving Stacklands a 3 out of 4. It's good, especially for the price, but again, it's just a $5 game at the end of the day. But hey, that's just me. I'd love to hear from you. Have you tried Stacklands and what'd you think of it? Of course, if you made it this far, I truly appreciate it. Sorry I haven't been posting as much recently. Life is just crazy between work, catching COVID, and just a bunch of other stuff that's been happening. Regardless, if you enjoyed this video, please do consider hitting that like, subscribe button, and maybe even checking out some more videos from me. And as usual, I hope you have a great rest of your day. Peace.